Hey, everybody, welcome back. Been a little bit, but we are back in action over here. My name's Dan McDermott. I'm the CMO here at Vouris, and as usual, I'm joined by Kyle Vamvouris, our CEO. Kyle, how's it going?
It's going excellent. It's good to be back in the chair, behind the mic, putting out the content that our people have been clamoring for.
Yeah, just to break the fourth wall here for a second, Kyle's actually in that room right over there. I'm in this room over here, but we figured we'd try something out with Riverside and get a little side-by-side action going here.
Well, because we're going to be full remote company now moving forward.
Edging closer and closer. It's just a couple days away. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, it will. It'll be a lot of fun. So the podcasts are going to be remote from now on, and we're testing out this tool. It should be great. I'm excited to dive in today, Dan.
I am too. We've had some really interesting conversations, I think, over the last few days. This is actually something an earlier somebody else I used to work for way back in the day. She used to like having these road meetings. That's what she would call road trips. It was just road meetings. And it's interesting what kinds of conversations come up when you're stuck in a little chamber with somebody driving along for hours and hours on end. So, you and I do a lot of errand running around here, and I think we come up with some pretty interesting topics of the stuff around us. And I feel like we kind of lose those conversations a little bit. So this is a chance for us to kind of dive into one of them, because earlier today we were talking about something that I wanted to dive into. Do you want to set it up, Kyle?
Yeah, well, maybe the best place to start here is I'm shipping a car. Now, how does that relate to anything that we normally talk about? Well, I was really impressed because I filled out the form for one of these car shipping companies, and I filled out two forms. Both companies called me within a minute of me filling out the form. Now, the form gives me a quote. It's an automated quote system. So I'm going to fill out the information. It's going to say, here's how much it's going to be. Would you like the book? Even with that system in place, they have a human being call me in under a minute. So I get the first call, and it was just too much for me. I was like, hey, give me a second here. I'm in the middle of filling out a form on your competitor's website. Call me in a little bit. I finished out the second form. That person called me right back. And luckily for them, they were the second form I filled out. So I ended up talking to that person, and we're having a conversation about shipping the car from California to Colorado. And he gives me a quote, et cetera. And the guy at the end, I decided to ask, how many calls do you do a day? As and you know this, Dan, I like asking people who are kind of in sales. I like asking them what their outputs are. And he told me 400 calls. He said, if you weren't in the area you're in, shipping it to where you're shipping it, you probably wouldn't get a call for a day, because it's such a high priority lane for them that they call really, really quickly. But yeah, I was just really impressed by that. And the guy's out there cold calling hundreds of people every single day, or not even cold calling, but calling hundreds of people every day to get a car shipped halfway across the country. Kind of interesting.
I mean, first of all, the numbers behind that are just really, really, it's something you don't think about. First of all, that's just one thing in general, is asking more questions about, to the businesses around you, especially for the people who are online or SaaS based, or, in the tech world, everything is kind of feels a little bit distant. But if you go in and you talk to, I don't know, the restaurant owner, you talk to, the guy down the street running the mom and pop shop, what his business is actually like, you find some really interesting local businesses doing some really cool stuff, doing really good numbers, for example. But it's also, I think, I used to work, again, one of my clients back in the day was a car company or in the car industry. And in their very highly competitive space, their big thing was speed to lead. That was it. Their second ninja superpower was SEO. They used it to build a $25 million lead $25 million a year business, just because they dominated SEO, and then they were much faster than their competitors at just getting in touch with a real human being who was going through trouble with a totaled car, essentially. And they were just on top of it. Their systems were so good just on the call immediately. It was so impressive. But yeah, I think that was an interesting kind of eye-opener for me to hear those numbers about this car shipping company specifically. And then it got me thinking, well, okay, as we're driving around here, what else catches the eye? And I think we happened to be in a strip mall earlier today, getting sandwiches, right? And then we see one of the few remaining Barnes and Nobles that are still open. And that's a common kind of business case study that you hear about: Barnes and Nobles versus Amazon, and versus the online sellers, but then also versus the other brick and mortar stores at Borders, exactly. And then why did this one stay open versus the borders? Why did this particular Barnes and Noble stay open versus the other Barnes and Noble stores? Why did this location succeed over the others? And and then kicked off a whole bunch of other companies that we sort of have gone through. And you think back to your childhood a little bit and like, oh, these were the big boys at the time, but then they don't even exist anymore.
Too big to fail. I mean, Sears is such a good example of this, where like no one thought Sears would ever go out of business. And then all of a sudden Sears goes out of business. And it's one of these things that, and this is what we ended up talking about. So this is a little bit of a repeat for you, Dan, but for those of you listening, we ended up talking a lot about Blockbuster and Netflix. And one of the things that's interesting about that story is everybody uses it as an example of kind of a old school player who doesn't want to innovate getting disrupted by like a young, agile, tech company. And, I'd heard it at so many conferences that one day I decided just to look into the story. I was like, that just seems like such an oversimplification of what probably actually happened. So I did a bunch of research, and the story is true where Blockbuster had a conversation with, I forget the CEO of Netflix's name, whatever. That guy's had a conversation with him about potentially acquiring the company. And Dan, look up the CEO. I feel like the CEO of Netflix is Greek.
Really?
Yeah, hashtag Greek excellence. Anyway, so what was very, very interesting about this story when I started doing some more research is I read an article from the perspective of the CEO of Blockbuster. And then I read a couple of other articles too that kind of corroborated this internal story. But basically what happened was the CEO of Blockbuster entertained an acquisition conversation of Netflix. And what he decided to do is not acquire Netflix because he had already started working on a streaming service. Blockbuster had a streaming service that was already in development, and he felt like they were already on the right path. And a lot of people don't know this, but there's also at the exact same time of all this, there's a hostile takeover of Blockbuster. Carl Icahn was taking over, we did a hostile takeover of Blockbuster, and the consensus from the board, I didn't either until I read this. I was blown away. The consensus of the board was that Blockbuster isn't a movie streaming company, or a streaming company. It's also not a video rental company. It's a convenience store. So they pushed heavily on like snacks. Got rid of late fees, which was a big income earner for Blockbuster. If you remember, like all of a sudden Blockbuster was like Snack City. You walked in there, you're like, what is all this stuff? And that was the big push. And sure, were there mistakes made? And maybe if there's a different CEO in place who had more of an M&A background, they would have acquired Netflix. Like, I'm not saying that the CEO is like totally, the best, and this was just an unfortunate situation. There were mistakes made, absolutely, but it wasn't because of lack of innovation. The CEO was actively trying to innovate. There's a lot more going on, and I just find it to be an interesting story.
I think it's one of those things where sliding doors moments, I think, is a term that I've been using a lot recently. I don't know why, but the idea of opportunities that kind of slip through your fingers, or things that, had you done this one thing differently, either things would have been much better or much worse, or and it's easy in hindsight to sort of look back and say, oh, look how stupid you were for not reacting to this, or to not do the change you have in the first place. Similar story was with Domino's and Pizza Hut. An argument is Pizza Hut could have been the innovator, could have been the one that was there to, use better ingredients, or create the pizza delivery tracking system, which is what Domino's did. And I think those two things are sort of possibly oversimplified, but those are the two things that people credit for Domino's massive success in overtaking Pizza Hut in the last 10 years or so, or whenever it was. That's the other classic story, right? And I think it's an interesting thing to look at our landscape right now, because we have, last year was like the crypto boom and potentially bust, but definitely this big, huge energy around crypto. People were getting funded left and right if you had crypto in anything that you were doing. Hey, guess what? We're a crypto company now. Well, okay, here's $100 million for something. There's the crypto energy that was there. And then this year, all the stuff with AI, which is, I think, a little bit deeper, possibly a lot deeper than some of the crypto stuff. But it's very interesting to sort of see, like, had you acted at a certain point in a certain way, are you ready? Are you on top of things? Are you, do you have things in your grasp that you can react to in a way that is, feasible to turn into something bigger?
Yeah, absolutely. The book Good to Great is a great example of these types of stories that I find really fascinating. Also, I want to close the loop for everybody because I know you wouldn't be able to sleep at night unless I did. The CEO or co-CEO of Netflix is a guy named Ted Sarandos, which is Greek, ladies and gentlemen. Netflix is going to be okay. We have a Greek up at the top.
So, that is true. He is a co-CEO right now, I believe. And
yep. Yeah, Greek excellence. Hashtag Greek excellence. Look, Silicon Valley Bank had big problems, huge problems. The government had to step in. People were worried about getting their money. So what did they do? They kicked out the old CEO and they put in a Greek CEO. That's right, folks. If you are having trouble, you bring in the Greeks. We figure it out. We invented everything. You don't think we can get you out of a little banking crisis?
See what I have to go through every day, guys. This is also something where I came to Vouris over here. I knew Kyle's background. I knew there was a Greek connection. It was all cool, but the amount of tzatziki and gyros that I've eaten since coming over here has been something special. I feel like part of me is now also honorary Greek at some capacity.
You're blessed.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what other stories, if any, come to mind for you about sort of things that are going on around you right now? So I think that one habit. Let me take a little sidestep here for a second. I think I heard this from Stephen King's book on writing. He took a page out of his mother's book, or I suppose his mom saw him doing a lot of reading as a kid, and very early on, she sort of took him aside and was like, "It's great that you're reading, but you need to start like writing the endings to these stories." That was how she started, was to get him to rewrite the endings. And then you need to start creating your own stories. And it got him to switch from just being a consumer to an active creator, which I think is an interesting, that's a whole nother subject right there. But I think from as a skill in terms of people who are in the entrepreneurial world, in the startup world, in the competitive business world, I think it's one of those things where you can read the case studies and kind of learn, and you will learn a lot from them. They're fantastic. Everything we just mentioned, really great case studies to look into if you haven't already. But it's also a very good and important skill, I believe, to start developing that same sort of attitude, that same sort of curiosity to things that are going on right now that might become the case study that people in 10 years are looking backwards at. And I think that we've seen a bunch of companies do really cool stuff. To me, I can list off a couple names if you'd like here, but I'm curious, I'd throw it to you, Kyle. Do you have any companies? It could be tools that we're currently using. It could be things that you've come across that you've tried out or you've heard about. What comes to mind for you as a company or companies that might be talked about in a similar light in 10 years as like the big case study of the time?
It's a really difficult question to answer because so many of these companies do really well, like right out of the gates. We live in a weird time where it's like the old way of doing business, going back to your local point, was like you did really good work. People started talking about that good work. And then you were able to slowly over time, by proving to the marketplace that you're a great provider of this product or service, that then over time you end up getting really, really large. Well, with all these VC-backed startup companies, you flip it on its head. All of a sudden, a company that has a very immature product has this marketing budget that's way in excess of what they have earned, right? So it's really tough to say. Like you look at tools like Notion, for example. Like Notion's such a fantastic tool. It's such a fantastic tool. I can see that one, lasting for a very, very long time. But I could also see it not. It's really tough to gauge when, there's all this kind of advertising dollar behind it. But they are clearly one that I think will last a very long time. I think their integration of AI now is very interesting. One that I'm very curious about.
Kyle, let me pause you for 1 second here, because on the Notion thing and the big advertising budgets that come with a lot of funding, something came up recently that I think is worth calling out. We've used ClickUp. I like it a lot. I think it's a great tool. We use Notion. I think it's a great tool. I've used Airtable. I think it's a great tool. So there's a lot of these kind of project management softwares, Asana, Trello, that I think most of us have at least have some sort of free account with. We've tried it. Yeah. And I don't mean to come down negatively too hard on the company I don't know, but I see so much advertising from Monday.com, and I've never used it. And the other day I brought this up to you, and you kind of made the point to me that I sort of thought, do you know anybody using the tool? And
I meant to bring this up, Dan. I met somebody who uses Monday.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. But go down the street, because you're right. Like, until we had spoken about this, I had never met anybody who uses Monday.com.
So, I mean, to be fair, it could be a great tool, but the level of awareness that it drives, I mean, it's on every YouTube video that I watch. It is the YouTube ad. I mean, it comes up to me on a daily basis. And so in part, it's very impressive that they have the capability to reach people like me, who is definitely the target demographic. But I just find it interesting that maybe there's, again, I don't want to be too negative on something, but I've used so much and believed so much, and I'm so deep into the Notion world. You're probably even deeper than I am, Kyle. But then, to some degree, ClickUp as well. But I never hear from them, and right. Yes, ClickUp had the Super Bowl commercial. So there was that type of thing that you could see them getting a little bit more active, but it's so interesting to sort of, I don't mean that it's fake or that it's anything like that. They're, I'm sure, a very real, very, very cool tool that exists. But the idea that I'm so exposed to them without ever taking a step into their world versus some of these other tools where I'm several steps in. It's just interesting. And so you got to sniff through some of the stuff out there,
Imagine if you saw on every single commercial break, you saw an ad for Doritos, but you never saw a bag of Doritos in your supermarket. You never seen somebody walk down the street with a bag of Doritos. You've never had somebody come to your house with a bag of Doritos. You'd be like, where are these elusive Doritos? And that's exactly how I feel about Monday.com. I have, until recently, never seen anybody use it. Now, all that being said, the company that I saw using it was actually a company. It was on a sales call. And he goes, well, let me pull up my Monday.com dashboard. And immediately I'm like, what?
Yeah, there we go.
I didn't tell him. I didn't let him know that this is crazy. He was the first I'd ever heard of using Monday. But I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be incredible. I get to actually see a little peek behind the engine here, or under the hood, and pulls it up. And dude, not too bad. I was actually like, wow, this is, he was creating dashboards. He had reports being populated and stuff. Like, I was like, hey, this actually looks like a pretty sweet tool. But man, until that one experience, I'd never met anyone who'd use it.
So that I promise I will get back on track in a second, but that brings up the age old question. I think my old copywriting genes come out, I guess. But the question to me is really, okay, awareness is great. The marketing side is fantastic, but why have I never converted into a trial user? I think that's a really interesting question to ask.
Because you don't know anybody who uses it. Look at Notion. Well, every Twitter thread that says, what's your favorite note-taking thing? Notion is the dominant response.
Exactly.
And it's not even close.
When it comes to the day-to-day tool that you will use every day, that you'll base a lot of your business, your performance on, where's the highest level of trust that you could possibly build from? It's peer-to-peer. It's referrals.
It's peer-to-peer.
And even ClickUp. I didn't know about ClickUp properly until I met you guys, and that was my introduction. So if you think about it, it's the ads are great, but they've got to drive towards something. And I've seen the case studies, I've seen all this stuff, but I've never seen an ad that actually makes it easy for me to start something. So it's something like, hey, here's the first day setup, or they used to do these like a 3-day email training tools or something like that. Something like that might be interesting to sort of replace your operating system with Monday.com in 24 hours. I might listen to that, but something templates, some sort of backup to do something with would be good. But I've taken us off track. Let me get back for a second here. So can you? Where did I cut you off, Kyle? You were talking about Notion as a potential tool to be for the future.
And I was actually going to talk about ClickUp for a second. But before I do, you obviously need to buy YouTube Premium, because you should not be listening to any of these advertisements.
I think the ads are interesting.
I don't. Okay, so let's talk about So the next thing I was going to take this to is actually ClickUp themselves. That's a company with a huge marketing budget. Now, great product. Don't get me wrong. Great product. I'm going to talk critically about it in a minute, but it is a great product, a wonderful product. The people over there are fantastic. I've been to the headquarters. Fantastic product. I love everybody there. But it's still a project management tool, which at the end of the day is one of thousands. Like the project management tool landscape is out of control. There has to be over 1,000 products to help you manage tasks and projects. ClickUp does it incredibly well, one of the best, but it's still just that. Notion does this incredibly well, one of the best. But one thing that Notion has that I think the other ones don't is it's not just a project management tool, right? Like some people just use it. It's so flexible. Some people just use it for taking notes. Other people use it for storing like videos they watch or articles that they want to read later. Other people use it for full-on project management. We use it for a whole bunch of mix of this.
Well, I've used it to create websites. I mean, like there's all kinds of interesting. Yes, you're right. But go on. I'll jump in a sec.
No, it's great. I mean, I look, that is something that I think a lot about, especially as we move to this world where there are infinite options when it comes to point solutions. And we're seeing a lot of bundling, especially in the enterprise of, companies like Microsoft, for example.
Yep.
Like what's Slack going to look like in 10 years from now? Like getting acquired by Salesforce was probably the best thing to ever happen to them, because now this kind of internal chat function is just getting immediately integrated into every solution on the planet. I mean, huddles on Slack right now, so like going to kind of Slack's move in this area, you can have links so people can join your huddle, which is like one step closer to, hey, my calendar is, our video conferencing tool is Slack versus other stuff. So everyone's trying to like absorb and add all of these point solutions so they can actually bundle and kind of keep and maintain their customer base. It's a very interesting thing that's happening right now, especially as cost of software development is being driven down. I think we're going to see a lot more point solutions for a lot cheaper, and it's going to increase the amount of bundling that takes place. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's definitely. I think it's simultaneously a threat to a lot of companies out there in terms of what's out there. I mean, well, any of these really big companies, if they already have something sort of that's in your space, overnight they might be able to introduce something, a little fancy feature to their competitive product or the product competing with yours that might just wipe you out. Which is it's always been the case, but I think it's even more powerful now than ever before. And I think one of the things that kind of stands out to me. That you just said is the idea of the depth of use of something. So can you not live without this product? And I think, or can you, would it be really damaging to kind of move away from this? And I think it is very interesting that, yes, I think with you and I use Notion very differently. For example, you got stressed out when you saw how I track my tasks on just what's going on in my different departments, right? And you sort of went out because you have a very different way of thinking through the platform. And yours is definitely a little bit more technical for sure. But the way that I use mine, I don't think I could live without it. You know what I mean? Like I have to have this. And when I've seen other people on the team use their spaces in their own ways, it's how they operate. And, could they, yes, technically do something with a different tool, maybe. But it's interesting. And the other place that came up to me recently was, I think I told you just yesterday, the amount of time I spent talking to ChatGPT was insane. And again, the depth of use, I use it for work stuff. Obviously, I've used it on some of the copywriting, training sessions that we do for our community, where we'll just take it in and do it as a summary tool or like a little edit tool, right. For one of the sales email, for example. That's dimension number one. Dimension number two, I've been writing stories with it, fiction, my sort of goofy nerd stuff that I like to do in my free time. And it's a fantastic creative tool. Midjourney is coming up very close behind it as number two, where I sort of use the two of them kind of together for everything now. And just the depth of it, I don't know where it's going. I think it's going to look, the speed of which everything's developing, it's obviously going to look very different just in a few months from now. But the depth of use of this, I suddenly find myself sucked in so much to this little world. That's like a paradigm shift. It's not like, oh, this is another interesting tool. I'm gonna start using this for the occasional thing here and there because somebody's told me to. And I just think that there's a little bit of that brand loyalty starting to build in a little bit. I think we both have felt that around couple of the AI tools out there. But I don't know. I feel like we've also been in a space for the past few years where I'm actually not that attached to a lot of tools that I use. I have maybe a handful of things that I'm loyal to. And then everything else, there's an opportunity for somebody to come in and steal my business.
Yeah, well, look, Notion's the only tool like that for me. I view Notion as like a piece of paper. I can make it however I want. Even when I was, giving you shit about how you use Notion, even in the same breath, I was like, but if it works for you, just keep it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like all that matters is what works. Like how do you feel when you're using the product? This is a great example. Like another tool that I think is really good is Superhuman for email. I think it's fantastic. Yeah. Less valuable for me now that my EA manages my inbox, but man, before that, I probably couldn't imagine living without it. Made email a lot better of an experience for me. So look, there's this classic saying, like if you're going to build a product, it needs to be 10x better than their current solution. And in fact, when we work with our clients and we have them do what we call market mapping, where we basically go really, really deep into the kind of the target market and the different verticals within those markets and the buyer personas, we do this whole big crazy thing. Part of it is, how are they trying to solve this problem today? And that's a question not a lot of people ask, but it's an incredibly important one. Because, for example, let's say it's a spreadsheet. I have a story I'll tell you about this in a minute. Let's say a spreadsheet is how they're currently managing it today. Is it really that bad? Or do we just think spreadsheets are bad because they've been around for a long time? And for the past 5 years, that has been the reality for a lot of B2B SaaS companies, where they're trying to replace a spreadsheet where the spreadsheet isn't that bad. And they were reliant on like younger people starting companies and going like, I don't want to use a spreadsheet to manage this. I should use a software. Now people are thinking this. Let me tell you a quick story about this. When about the year into Vouris, I'm the primary salesperson here. All of our entire sales pipeline was in, at this point, I think we were still on Notion. So we had a brief time where we switched from Notion and then we switched back. But I believe it was all on Notion. Either way, it was in our task management tool, what I was using for managing tasks and my notes and all of that stuff. And I had it in there. And I remember talking to a sales rep from HubSpot, and they were like, okay, so what are you currently using right now to manage your deals in your pipeline? And I said, I'm using my task management tool. And the person, like I could see them light up. Like they were excited that that's what I was using. Oh, he's not using Salesforce. Like this should be easier to close. The reality was there was 0% chance I was switching. I do all of the sales myself. I don't want to open up a whole nother tool. Like I get it. I'll have better insights into our sales process there. And by the way, I would tell all of our clients to go use HubSpot, use Salesforce. I would not allow a client of ours to leverage a task management tool for their CRM. But for me, I was managing all the sales myself. Our operation is fairly small, and it worked within my workflow. Going to a different tool didn't make sense. Therefore, the HubSpot CRM was not 10x better than my current solution. It just wasn't. But what happened when we hired sales reps? Well, now, of course, I need better insights. I need better analytics. Then all of a sudden, it became a better solution. So I think this is a really important thing for everybody listening to really take a grasp of. Not only do you need to understand the problem that your buyers want to solve and are motivated to solve, you also have to ask, how are they trying to solve it today? Because if it's a big enough problem, they're not just closing their eyes, hoping that things work out. You have to figure out what the current solution is. And that's your number one competitor. No decision today, no decision is the number one closed lost reason. It's no longer I lost to a competitor because of pricing. Yep. It's no longer I lost because we didn't have this feature set. It was I decided not to do anything. And that's a very different world than the one we've been used to over the past couple of years.
Exactly. And I think there are a couple of things that are very well known, I think, in the marketing world. They're less well known in the sales world that I think I sort of blabber on about all the time now, just because I'm so set on them. But it's because what we just said on the idea that it's what are they currently doing to try to solve the problem or to handle this problem, and how do they feel about it? I think that's a very important sort of, a clause to add there, because, there's an identity element that comes into some, to some people's use of a tool as well. That's going to be very hard to break. And, the question is, should you even be trying to break it? And the answer is probably not. if they really love it and they're just gung ho about, even if it's a competitor or it's a crazy, complex system that they built in house, if they really love it and they're really tied to it and they don't see all the value that, that switching over, would do, and that it is dramatically better, like you said, 10x, then it's probably something you should leave alone. And the tools that I kind of go back to all the time are, the jobs to be done framework. And that's basically, it's a way to have, and what's called an unstructured interview, where you are able to sort of speak to a buyer or non-buyer and explore the emotional reasons, or the psycho-emotional reasons for somebody having made a purchasing decision, whether it was to purchase or not purchase. And that's basically what I used to do, by the way, is like basically I'd get on the phone for companies and call up their buyers and non-buyers and then look for the commonalities, the threads, the differences. And looking at some people are like, it's too much of a hassle. And okay, well, maybe there's a few things there to dig into, So to some people, they're like, look, I've been dealing with John down the road for 40 years. And there's no way in hell, I don't care what you're doing. John, you don't have no idea how many times he's been there for me. He's helped me out with this thing a bunch of times. Of course, he's got my business for life. And then if I push on that anymore, then I'm being an asshole, basically. I think that there's people's attachments to their tools or the attachment to the solutions, I suppose is a better way to phrase it, is so important for people to really listen to. And then if there's a logical reason out of it, cool, maybe there's still, a sales conversation there. But then if there's just a very emotional tie, that should be respected too, no?
100%. Yeah. I mean, and there's also lines up with a trend that we've been seeing over the past few years too, which is this trend of localized software companies, where they're a software company built in like a normal town that provides software to a lot of companies in that town. Like it's kind of their main region. And then they also extend from there. I'm trying to think of a good example right now, but I'm somewhat blanking.
I've got one for you if you like.
Oh, okay. Let's go with yours then. Yeah.
This is not so much software as it is maybe kind of the service. I'm not sure what it is, but it's a food delivery app. And I'm blanking on the name specifically, but it was built in Calgary in Canada. And eventually it was sold to Just Eat, which is the big, justeat.ca was the big, and I think it's originally a British company, but Just Eat was the big food delivery company up in Canada, maybe going back 10 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe. Uber Eats and some of the others were kind of coming into the market, DoorDash and whatnot. But even when I was still up in Canada back as of 2018, Just Eat was one of the big players. Anyways, what had happened was a couple of scrappy food entrepreneurs had basically come together and built up the local delivery systems and gotten the business of all the local restaurants in Canada, did a very good job of local service, and then spun out everything up and eventually sold to Just Eat for millions of dollars. And then when Just Eat came in to replace them, it's a classic thing that I think happens quite often. You lose a bit of the humanity this happens with craft beer companies all the time, breweries that are sold to the big breweries. They lose a little bit of their local energy, and I don't think that's an always the case kind of thing. But does that line up with what you're saying? Yeah,
totally. I mean, that's a great example of a company that services the community that they're in as well, which I think is probably the strongest version of this. There's also versions of like, hey, we created this scheduling app. Like we had a client a while back that had created a scheduling app, somewhat like Calendly, but it was a lot more robust and it was better for people who did in-person meetings. And they were, based in a small town, and they kind of owned that town. A lot of people around them use the tool there. And I think that's great. I mean, you're also seeing this verticalized versus just local too, where I'm going to create a project management tool for architects as opposed to just a project management tool. Is there a notion for bankers or whatever, so like, yeah, you can see how that could provide unique value to a marketplace because it's built specifically for them. I just see a lot of that continuing. I also see it getting a lot cheaper to develop product. And I think software at SaaS specifically is the new small business.
I think so too. I think it's so easy to start, and it's so easy to iterate as well. So you're not necessarily locked in like crazy, like you would be, for example, with a restaurant or with some of these brick and mortar things where you're. I mean, if you spent $200,000 building a commercial kitchen, there's not much more you can do with it aside from well, exactly. But I do think
actually let me go one step further there. This is a prediction. Okay.
Prediction time.
Definitely could be wrong. I'm not a big prediction guy, but I feel that this is the direction. I think, like I said, SaaS is going the way of the small business of the future, where you're going to have one technical founder, maybe two, with a team under 10, using AI to become as effective as they possibly can, building products. And everyone, both founders or just one of the founder, it's going to make $150, $250, maybe $350,000 a year. So good, they're going to do well, and that's going to be the life that they live. And they're not looking to create the next unicorn. They're looking to pocket a couple $100,000 a year and provide a great life for them and their family. And I think this is going to happen more and more and more. And then other players are going to come in and going to say, all right, either we acquire all of or majority or minority shares in all of these companies that service similar markets and do cross promotion like crazy to increase the value of the entire portfolio. Like an example of this is Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank does this in the wedding industry. He is invested in a whole bunch of different wedding service providers, which is so smart because once you say the word wedding, the price doubles, triples, 3x. I often joke, if you're having a wedding and you want a beautiful wedding cake, like a 7-tier wedding cake, it'll be cheaper for you to call 7 bakeries and ask them each to make 1 tier and tell them, I just need a white the cake, and then just stack them all yourself than it would be to have one person do all 7.
Wedding hacks.
Exactly. There you go. That's what people come here for. My point is, then they can cross promote because there's one big trigger event that you're taking advantage of. I have a wedding. So for example, Notion, we just re-implemented Notion. The trigger event is I felt I was doing a horrible job managing all of the team meetings across our company. I felt like our meetings weren't being performed very well. I had trouble tracking them. I didn't feel as organized. I didn't like the current tools we were using to try to manage this and other stuff within the business, specifically on an operations perspective. So I got Notion, a tool that I love and I'm very comfortable with, built out the systems as I wanted them built out, and have now rolled it out and have solved that problem. That was a trigger event. So I feel like you're going to see this a lot more, and there's going to be less of, hey, I'm trying to create the next unicorn, and more of, I'm trying to create a really sustainable business.
So do you think moving forward, like just stay on prediction mode for a second, let's say you go forward 10 years or even 5 years or 3 years, the market share of entrepreneurs in America will go up, for example, dramatically. Do you think that that's a fair
Of course. Yeah. And I think every content creator who gains some traction has no choice but to develop some kind of product. Now, it might not be a software product. It could be a physical product. It could be a digital product or course or something. But AdWords or AdSense, whatever they call it, you're not making enough money from ads. You're only doing okay. You're doing okay with brand deals for sure. But how long do you want to just do other people's brands and whatnot? You want to do what Mr. Beast does, sink all of the money you can into creating the best possible videos as possible. I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Beast's main YouTube channel is a loss leader for him or a break even for him. And he makes all of his money on Feastables, on Mr. Beast Burger, on whatever other he has a business where he translates YouTube videos for other YouTubers to put them into other markets, which is like a really clever business idea. Yeah, this is one, I forget where he talked about this, but it's not one he's very public about, but he created it for his own channel and they started dominating in South America. And now they're in a whole bunch of different countries. So that translation process, he's spun off as its own business and now does that for other creators. I think, and look, I could be wrong. He could be just raking in the dough from his main YouTube channel. So don't quote me on that. I don't know if that's true or not. But what I do know is that he makes a lot of money in these other ventures, which are products that he owns. Another example is Prime Hydration. Logan Paul, is it Logan or is it the Jake?
That was Logan Paul.
Logan Paul's company. Now, that's another entity that came in. Maybe that's the same thing that happened with Mr. Beast, but they own a significant percentage of that company. That's where I see a lot of this going. I think software is going to be part of that equation.
Well, yeah, you took it in a different direction than I thought you would. That's interesting. To me, well, just the sophistication of young people, who are, let's say in high school, that are able to come out and just have business expertise. And, at some level, yeah, all of us, like back in when I was growing up in the 90s, yes, I could go and cobble together some sort of business door to door, doing something. I'm sure, yes, most kids could. But it's changed dramatically. I mean, I think you and I have both spoken in the last just couple of months to some very young people who are coming out of who are in the 18 to 21 year old range, who have genuinely built significant businesses or businesses that are clearly on the way to becoming significant, because they were able to just get started on an idea and get moving. And I think that the barriers to entry are obviously much lower. I mean, the idea of no code tools are sort of way up. AI stuff is now obviously taking over a lot of stuff. It's so easy to set up a Shopify store or Etsy or any of these things. So it's been a trend for years. I mean, that's literally been the internet, right? But I think it's been really accelerating in the last couple of years specifically. At least for me, that's how I felt. And I think, when you look around at some of the opportunities, I think maybe this is one more little segue that I want to smoothly slide into, is the idea of basically, who do you pay attention to when you're building a business? As we are over here for the past few years. Who do you listen to? And I'm setting you up a softball question over here, because I have a
before you ask it, I have one more thing to bring up here.
Okay,
it just hit me. I forget who said this, which I hate when I do this, but what I'm about to say, I took from somebody else. Full disclaimer. I forget who I took it from, but who cares, and maybe I'm making it better. Who knows? It is so important that young people get exposed to entrepreneurship, because they will tackle problems that the experienced entrepreneur would never dare touch. So, for example, who in their right mind today would embark on the journey of building Facebook? You'd be like, are you out of your damn mind? Like, just the amount of infrastructure needed. Like, it's a tough business, and like, you're not going to monetize it. How are you going to monetize this? By advertising. So you need to get a huge base of users in order for the advertising to make any amount of money. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Airbnb. It's like, you're delaying so long the gratification. And maybe these aren't the best examples, but there's a lot of businesses where it's like a service company, for example, like an ad agency. It's, an experienced entrepreneur who maybe used to have an ad agency isn't trying to build another ad agency. They're like, look, I've done the services game. I understand that. I'm off to these other ways to make money that might be a little bit easier for me. So there's something, there's this theory that really it requires the young entrepreneur to push all of the innovation, because experienced entrepreneurs know how difficult it is just to build a regular business, let alone a truly disruptive and innovative business. And I also think that since that's happening younger now, that we're going to see more and more innovation at an earlier age, where those people have less bills. They also have less context on how things are run. Therefore, we're going to see a lot more innovation, a lot more interesting businesses getting developed.
Yeah, I think that sets off a whole bunch of stuff, man. I think the idea of where and why innovation comes into play is huge. And then also what kinds of business models are just maybe a little bit safer, but also a little bit more, like you said, the person building, let's say, let's say an ad agency, where they've been in the space for a few years, they know how to run ads, and putting together an agency should be a relatively simple process to cash flow. And, can you make a couple grand a month pretty quickly? The idea, probably yes. Yeah. Can you scale it to a certain level? Probably yes. Yeah. Once you have that, and you have I guess maybe a little bit of the expertise, a little bit of the network, a little bit of the stability, or what's the word, the safety net of not just a bank account there, but some incoming cash flow. I think that's when you can then it's almost like 2 seasons of an entrepreneur's life, where as a very young entrepreneur, you can go probably kind of crazy and just be like, all right, I'm 18 years old. I will build the next Facebook, and I'm going to spend a year on this thing, and I'm going to cobble together the money. I'm going to do all this wild stuff, and it's going to be awesome, or it's going to likely, flame out and just epic fail. Cool. But then a lot of people go through that kind of moonshot first, and then build a more stable company with, that's more service-based, more, more, I'm definitely projecting here. This is my story. So but a little bit more of a stable business, and then eventually come back to it once cash flow and money is good again, and that safety net is there. I've seen people especially people who stayed corporate for years, who are in their mid-40s, kind of retire early, after working in tech, for the past 20 years, 25 years. I think of one person in particular. They're on retirement money and more. Several properties, all this kind of stuff. I mean, that's probably the best way to get rich, is just get one of those jobs, just stay with it. But then that's the person. Yeah, well, buy real estate, do all that. But that person is then ready to take another shot at sort of the big stuff. And, right. And that makes sense,
who's an anomaly, and obviously incredibly famous, is Elon Musk. Like, why would he ever want to buy Twitter? Like, that's a brutal business to own. And we can say whatever we want about it. There's a lot of ways Elon Musk can make money. An infinite amount of ways, probably. And buying a really bloated software company that also is really in the public eye sounds like a really stupid way to do that. So the motivation is beyond money, sure. But then the same thing you could say about the other companies too, right? So you have Tesla, then SpaceX, and then the Boring Company. It's like, man, aren't you just sick of the hardest possible businesses to build? But he's not. And that's pretty, you got to admire that. Whatever anyone thinks about the guy, you got to admire that about him, because it's not a lot of people built that way.
Oh, for sure. And I think there's a really interesting thing with him over this. I mean, I definitely don't want to get too deep into this rabbit hole right now, but the idea of is the idea of making Twitter truly a free speech platform actually what he's after, / is that a real thing? I think there's a lot of disagreements over that. People get worked up over that stuff. Oh, I have my thoughts. I think you and I are actually pretty close on this, but the why behind people building is the decisions they make. I mean, had he used the 45 billion, 44 billion, whatever it was to on something else, would it be another SpaceX? Would it be another thing of that magnitude? Is Twitter going to be something of that magnitude? Looking back at 10 years, social media as a whole, look what's happened to Facebook. Is this a sliding doors moment for social media in general? Are people going to eventually come back, or is, Blue Sky or whatever, Mastodon, some of the competitors? Are these going to, is this a trigger event, as you said, to get users acting in a different way? Maybe. What
do you think? That's an interesting conversation here, because you're right. There are all these spin-off social media platforms that end up turning into the platform of choice for a specific community. And whatever it is that brings that community together, it is what it is. But do you see that being the future? Or do you think a platform like Twitter, for example, is going to be able to figure out a way to accommodate everybody?
I think it goes back to something that you said earlier, which is the basically what works for whom at what time. And what you had said earlier was this idea that more and more people are just able to create businesses, and just every creator out there basically is a business owner to some degree, or has the beginnings of a business in their grasp. And I think the social media platform that respects that the most, for, I know this is an overused term, but the creator economy. It's actually a huge goddamn thing right now, and it's going to become bigger and bigger. So we know people who are, just actually, well, on the Notion front, there's a guy who makes Notion templates and has $1 million a year business just in sales and just off of a couple of templates. It's a one-person company. He, as far as I know, doesn't use any fancy tools or anything, major. And he operates off of Twitter and Gumroad. That's his stack. Notion, obviously, Twitter and Gumroad. He's making over $1 million a year in sales, which I'm guessing the overwhelming majority of that is profit. I mean, you're talking about, a very, very healthy business.
Yeah.
I think social media platforms that understand this, like YouTube is probably the big one that understands how to support its creators. I think that's the one that is probably the best model. I think YouTube is of all social. A lot of people don't even think about it like a social media company, but I think it is. So that empowers creators. Twitter does to some degree. I think it's getting better at it. And then I think, odd example, but like OnlyFans probably has its own angle there, where it's encouraging more and more people to sort of jump in and just do whatever the hell they're going to do, but actually make money on it. And at the end of the day, yes, you want creative expression in a lot of places. I'm sure that, if I told you that, hey, you could become an artist on this channel and kind of publish your stuff, or, GitHub is, I guess, version of that for engineers. But just showing your portfolio, it's like a means to an end. Whereas can the platform just become the end? Can I just be on Twitter and know that my Twitter account is making me $1 million a year? Or even, can I make a full-time living off of Twitter? And I think that the answer eventually is going to be a lot more realistic of a yes than most people realize, especially if you go as far as 10 years down the road.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. What do they say? Like, never be beholden to a platform. Yet there are a lot of people beholden to YouTube. And I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say, like, you got to build something outside of YouTube because YouTube could take it away. With the exception of, like, oh, we're being censored because we're, left wing or right wing or whatever. Other than that, like, I just mean like people who are creating content that aren't political and goofy. So like they create this content on, let's say, how to make better websites. Stuff. I've never heard someone like that really go like be super crazy passionate. Like you cannot rely on YouTube at all. I've seen like, hey, you need to have a back end so you're not just reliant on advertising from YouTube. I've definitely seen that kind of stuff, but not with the same level of passion as you do. Like, oh, you built a big Instagram following. Well, you better have a newsletter because you're going to get fucked, Yep. And I could be wrong. I could be wrong for sure, but I have not encountered a lot of that. And what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Where it's like, what other social media platform can kind of bridge the gap of, I don't know. I guess of like, hey, you can safely own an audience here. You can safely own an audience here. Substack's another example.
I think it's let me ask you this. If you were to just start a business, let's say you had full-time, Vouris didn't exist, right? And you had full-time to just build a business and it was just you maybe you and an assistant or something, but it's really going to be Kyle Vamvouris. That's it. I think the people that are specifically in your radar, all of us, but especially for you, it's B2B folks. I mean, that's you're sort of born and bred in this space. People like that are on LinkedIn mostly, I assume, maybe on Twitter. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, if you were to build a business and you just had one platform to do it, what would you do it on?
YouTube. People spend so much time on YouTube compared to every other platform.
I think I agree. If there was a secondary, because I've also seen a lot of people have a couple of channels. I'm not trying to say like, hey, this is an omnipresent thing, but you see people that they leverage one to another. Like a lot of people are in both Twitter and LinkedIn these days. A lot of people are building because it's very similar feel on both.
Usually
there's two.
Usually there's one that's an acquisition channel, and then the other one is a conversion channel. Right. So like probably TikTok. If my other one's YouTube, I'm probably picking TikTok, and I'm driving TikTok to YouTube, and I focus on conversion on YouTube through the description or whatever.
Well, I'd be selling feet pics on OnlyFans, so I don't know about you.
My feet don't look good enough.
So Yeah, I think that's just an interesting thought exercise in general. To just people should be on top of. I think I'd like to be on top of this stuff more often. Anyways, that's one of the reasons I value these. These are obviously structured. Well, actually, they're not structured, but there are opportunities for us to have this back and forth. And I hope people out there are listening, getting some value from this. But also, just selfishly for a second, it's a good chance for me to bounce some ideas around, because I'm lost in my day to day sometimes, and I don't think back to what's the tool out there that we should be using? What's the real thing that's out there? Who's really doing something different and special that we should be paying more attention to? And maybe that's a good place to wrap.
Real quick, let me one more thing, and then we can wrap. It reminds me of the quote, and you know this quote because I told you about it, that my dad told me. I was talking to my dad. My dad retired at 45. He was an entrepreneur, and now he lives in Greece. And I was talking to my dad, and I said, "Hey, when you were running your company, did you ever just wish you could restart? You're like, God, I kind of made a bunch of mistakes here. Let me just restart and do it better this time." And my dad immediately goes, "Yeah, of course, all the time. But the reality is you can always just restart. You don't have to shut down the whole company and then restart. You can just restart whenever you want. Just make sure you're being smart about it. You have a plan, blah, 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 and there's a good rollout. You can always just start again." And I was like, you know what, Pops? That's a pretty wise advice. Sometimes we get so caught up of the permanence of our situation, when in reality, you kind of change it whatever you want. So hey, maybe you're listening to this and you have a company and you're like, gosh, we really need to do a better job creating content on whatever platform. You can always just do that. You can always just stop. For example, I do a lot of content on LinkedIn, and I've finally accepted that LinkedIn's more of a lead nurture channel for me than it is a new customer acquisition channel. I've gotten one deal from LinkedIn, and I've been writing content rather consistently for 5-6 years. So it's just not a great channel for me for new business. But a lot of people will come back a year later, 18 months later, and say hey, we spoke a year ago and I've been seeing your post, and finally the timing made a lot more sense, and then they'll buy. So I've sort of accepted that. But let's say I did not think that was true. I could always just say, I'm just going to just focus on Twitter, and I'm not going to focus on LinkedIn anymore. You can do whatever you want, which is great.
I think that's wise advice. And just to piggyback off of that for a second, this is something that I've definitely had on my mind recently. It's basically the idea of who you're. This is maybe something we can get into in more detail on a future episode. But the idea of who you're spending time around and who you're paying attention to. Yeah. So who are you modeling after? Are you modeling after somebody who's really built something in your business? And the answer is you should probably have a bunch of models where it's somebody who's, like your dad, for example, just very much in one sort of dimension is going to have a lot of feedback that makes sense for you through a certain lens. But I know of people who will, for example, and I've fallen into this category for sure myself, where you just listen to Tim Ferriss, for example. And Tim Ferriss, that's a classic example to me, because he started off, 4-hour work week guy. That was kind of my time, and it was just made a lot of sense. But then his rise was, meteoric. It was incredible.
Yeah, huge.
Within a couple of years, he was only talking to billionaire investors, talking about billionaire problems. And I go, okay, I guess that's nice. But if I'm making investment decisions or I'm trying to model a billionaire when I'm far from that, probably not the right move. If I'm trying to model somebody with a 1,000-person company, can I take some lessons from it? Sure. But am I really trying to model really my entire behavior around that person? Probably a dangerous move if it's just one dimensional.
Yeah. Okay, let me actually double click on that for a second, because I do think this is important. There's also people that got there in a non-traditional way. You think all these billionaires are people who started companies from nothing and build them. That's what I think a majority of them are, right? They're like the Mark Zuckerbergs and stuff from whatever, they were young. There's also a whole group of people, I don't know about billionaires, but who got wealthy not really building businesses. Mm-hmm. They invested, or they kind of worked at one, and then they kind of moved up the company hierarchy, and then ended up in a VP role, then a CEO role, and they never built something of their own from scratch. different type of feedback you're going to get from that person. Like, hey, how do I be a great CEO? I'm sure they can give you a ton of great advice. But like, how do I build, I'm in the mud right now. Like, how do I get myself out of the mud and on some concrete? Like, they might not have the best advice. And somebody who spoke about this recently was Dave Ramsey. So I was listening to Dave Ramsey's podcast called Entre Leadership, which is a really good one, where he just like answers. It's a little hit or miss, but it is good overall. Where he like answers questions from people who own businesses on how to run their business better. And one of the things that he says that I really like is he talks about how he's going to give you advice from the trenches. He's like, I've been there. I currently run a company that has 1,100 employees, built the company with no debt. I think they do a couple $100 million a year in revenue, which is bananas. He doesn't have any debt. He didn't build a company on any debt at all. And he goes, I have 1,100 employees. I can tell you about any stage of business from 1 when it was me to 1,100. But if you call me and you say, I have 5,000 employees, I'm trying to trying to double my company next year. He's like, I'm going to have no idea how to answer those questions. And one, it's honest, which is good. But two, it's also, I think, a lesson in the sense that we should also think through what advice we take from people that we consume content from.
Well, it's kind of funny. The example that I thought you were going to bring up was we were listening to the All In podcast earlier today, actually, and I believe it was it Sachs? I mean, remind me if I'm getting the story kind of mixed up here, but actually, I think you were telling me about listening to the All In podcast, and there was a Sachs moment where he was talking about had one of the companies basically. How about you tell the story?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. So I'll just give the real high level. Basically, David Sachs was is an angel investor in a company that I believe he said they're doing around 32 million in ARR, and he's not on the board. And they are, I'm going to ignore all of the technical VC jargon. Basically, they're in a really difficult spot, and it looks like the founders aren't going to make very much, if not nothing, very much of anything, if not nothing, on the 10 years they spent building this company because of the current situation that they're in. And David's point was, if they had called me a year ago, I would have told them to cut spending. And if they had cut spending a year ago, they wouldn't be in this situation today. And that's, just if only there was someone on the board who had a little bit of wisdom that they could tell the founders, maybe they'd be in a different situation.
I blamed for a long time one of the early projects that I did with a friend of mine on some really dumb advice we got from somebody else, from somebody who had a lot of entrepreneurial experience, who we sort of held up on a pedestal as like, the entrepreneur, the successful guy who's a generation older than us. And the advice was really so dumb. Looking back at it, it was so stupid. But we didn't question it. We were young and stupid, and we listened to some stupid advice. Yeah. And I think if nothing else, I had very few regrets about a lot of things. I had some experiences I learned a ton from, but very few genuine regrets. That's one genuine regret, is that I wish I knew a little bit more. And this is just a natural thing of, I think, entrepreneurship. You learn this stuff, but I wish I knew a little bit more about how to ask for advice and who to listen to, and how to surround myself with better. Alex Hormozi is somebody who speaks to this quite a bit. I think he went through a kick where he was, surrounding himself with the right people and doing it in the right way. But I think there's a lot of people out there. I have a couple of friends who are like this, who are just good at, actually, you're pretty good at this too. The idea of having a bunch of people who are maybe a couple of steps ahead of you, but within touching distance, or who are at the same stage, who are just facing the same kinds of problems as we have been over the past few years, how we will continue. I think it's very important to build this sort of, it's going to look different for everybody, but if you have a multidimensional network of feedback, of advice, of people that you can go to, and you understand what you're asking for from each person. You understand, hey, look, I need general feedback, or, hey, look, I know that you went through X and I'm now I'm going through a version of that. How did you handle this? Give me specifics. That's something where I think too few entrepreneurs really have the energy or put in the time into some of those relationships that genuinely could be life-changing and business saving and, ceiling removing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Treat everybody like there's something you can learn from them. I think it's really important advice. You should have people who are a little bit ahead of you, who are very far ahead of you. You should have peers. You should have some people who are a little bit behind you. you never know where the idea is going to come from. And maybe we can close with this, not to bring Elon back into the mix, but there's a really great video that we've talked about before where he's walking around, I guess, where they keep the rockets. And there's some guy interviewing him, and Elon's explaining like something about how these rockets work. And the person says, "Oh, so that's just on thing 1." And then Elon stops and goes, "Yes, but we should really put it on thing 2 as well. Let's circle back on that." And I guess the guy came back a year later and Elon had implemented it. It was a really kind of a big deal and like a big kind of innovation for them and help them have a successful launch, whatever recent launch that they did. And that came from just some dude asking a question that probably didn't even understand what he was doing. He was just like, "So it's just on this thing." And then that triggered the thought. I don't know if that would have done it for everybody. You know, I was really impressed by that moment.
I think a lot of people, a lot of leaders, especially who are just you get hoity-toity, a little bit snobbish about certain things, especially over people who you think are less qualified than you, or younger than you, or older than you know. I just remembered a YouTube short that I saw recently where it's the then CEO of Microsoft, I think it was Microsoft, scoffing at the iPhone when it came out. And it's a clip of him going and just kind of like trashing it. But the look at it, it's so snobbish. Yeah. And I think that's always a dangerous little moment where, you know, you might end up with a Microsoft Zune, I guess, going back in the day. Remember those?
I had a friend who thought the Zune was the greatest thing of all time.
I found Brand. Well, my buddy got an iPhone or an iPod or whatever it was back in the day. I went out and I was like, nah, I'm going to find the up and coming thing. And I bought this wacky contraption for like $500 when I was in college, which was it was a big deal. And I just remember using the hell out of it, being made fun of by all my friends, and then within a few months, it was like, yeah, I should have got the thing that actually has an entire database of music to listen to. But anyway, on a side, I think the advice you listen to, the people you surround yourself with, is so important. And that's something that I hope you and I never lose here at the company. I think we've the network in general, if you look to the broader team too that we have, is amongst all of us. There's a lot of really cool people running around that we probably should be making. We also have an opportunity that you make a little more use of, at the secondary, tertiary relationships out there. But anyway, maybe you okay to stop here?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for listening. We're going to be doing more of these coming up. So if you have any questions or you'd like some specific topics for us to talk about, feel free to drop them in the comments. Otherwise, we will see you next time. Thanks, Kyle.
Talk soon.
Bye, guys.